Welcome back to the next episode of the Operating List. Today we are joined by Surgeon Professor Michael Vallely, who's a cardiothoracic surgeon. So, Professor Michael Vallely, nice to have you on the show. Could you give us a little bit of an introduction into what you do and what you're up to nowadays?
Oh, thank you, Dax. Yes, recently returned from the United States. I was in the US for a few years, and I've just taken up a position as the Director of Cardiothoracic Surgery and Professor at the new Victorian Heart Hospital, which is a joint entity between Monash Health and Monash University, which is a standalone cardiac and likely soon to be thoracic once we incorporate that facet of our work. Heart Hospital. It stands on the Monash Clayton campus in Melbourne. So that's what I've been doing. Prior to that, I had some time at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and some time at Mount Sinai Health Network in New York. And prior to that, I worked in academic surgery in Sydney.
Awesome.
Mm.
I'm glad that you brought up you working in the US recently because we are going to have a bit of a chat about that later in today's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
episode.
mm-hmm.
But just to start off with, I'd like to take you all the way back. Because today, obviously, we know you as a cardiothoracic surgeon who has, a keen interest in research and academic surgery. But I want to take you back to maybe just a few years back when you first got into med school or first thought about applying to med school. When did you realize that was the path for you, and what was your journey in med school like?
Uh, okay, so way back, I grew up in the country. So I grew up on a mixed sheep and wheat farm near Cootamundra, which is a little town, sort of just slightly north of Wagga, maybe an hour north of Wagga in southwestern New South Wales. And I was always wanting to be a surgeon. I don't know why, but I did. And at the time, I wanted to be a veterinary surgeon because we had animals and other things. And then for a whole lot of different reasons, in the country, veterinary medicine wasn't particularly well funded. So a lot of the time, the vets couldn't treat the animals. And in my work experience, I did with veterinary, the animals a lot of the time were put down, small animals, or they were farming animals that weren't worth enough money to save. So I thought that I found that all a bit difficult. And then I realized that I just liked people probably more than I really wanted to spend time with animals. And I spent a fair bit of time with we had a GP friend that was an anaesthetist, and then another GP friend who was a surgeon. So I spent a little bit of time there, and then it seemed like a natural thing to do. So I went to medical school with direct entry at the University of Sydney, and I went to medical school with a view to being a country general surgeon and coming back to the country, which is what I planned to do. I got some interesting advice around career paths that was probably inaccurate. I'll be honest with you at the time, in that it was difficult to train in the city and be in the country, but that was in fact incorrect. So I just was asking the wrong people, and often in life, asking the wrong people can give you the wrong advice. But when you're a young guy, it doesn't matter. So, and then I developed an interest in vascular, sort of cardiovascular, and I wanted to look at vascular surgery. But vascular surgery at the time it bears no resemblance to what it is today. So it was endoluminal stuff was incredibly rudimentary and experimental, and a lot of it was just limb salvage surgery that often wasn't successful. So it didn't seem like a good thing to do. And then I just randomly decided to do cardiothoracic surgery. It was almost a bit whimsical, actually, and then that kind of stuck, and off I went. I joined cardiothoracic surgery at a crossroads, really, of cardiothoracic surgery with, stenting really wasn't in existence when I first decided to do it, and then it came on with a vengeance, and that's obviously changed our landscape a lot. And then when I became a consultant surgeon a little bit later on, obviously transcatheter valve stuff come in. So things have changed a little bit. In between my medical student experience, I lived on campus at college. I played a lot of sport. Academia really wasn't my thing. I'll be honest with you. I worked very hard at school, and I had a pretty good time at university and did a lot of stuff with college, and had a lot of friends and played rugby and rode and spent time doing a bunch of different things. And then I went to Royal Prince Alfred as a student and ended up there as a resident. And then ultimately I decided I want to do something a little bit more substantial in academia. So I ended up doing a PhD, which was unusual. It's not that unusual these days. In fact, it's becoming a little bit mandatory. So I did that, and that was fun. And that also introduced me to my interest in off-pump surgery. And and then that led me on to, what I've done from a research and international experience. So it's funny how things play out for you that way.
Yeah, sounds like you did enjoy life while you could in med school before you really started putting your head
Yeah,
down and getting the
well,
work done.
yeah, well, life's a journey, and I also think that a lot of the people, in full transparency, a lot of the people that work really, really, really hard in med school disappeared off the face of the academic earth. I'm all for, I think you've got to be a balanced human being as well, because life is a balance. It's not all work, and it's not all play either. And I think, one of the things we are as doctors is we deal with people. And I think it's important to know a bunch of different people. I've got a great network of people that I knew at university that's come in handy over the years with different things, because we don't do medicine in isolation. Obviously, we interact with the outside world. So, no, I really enjoyed it. And you're only young once, I'll tell you that for free. And it goes by very quickly. So I think that the reality is you know, to do a bunch of different things when you're young. So.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to hear you say that you said that you almost always wanted to do surgery, and then
Mm,
as you kind of went through, the medical school pathway or even beyond that, you kind of figured out what exactly in surgery you wanted to do.
mm.
But was there any point throughout medical school or throughout training where you thought perhaps maybe surgery isn't for me, maybe I'll try this other specialty, or I'm really enjoying this thing. Was there anything like that, or were you always, you know,
That's a very interesting question. Not so much surgery. I had several crisis points where I actually considered leaving medicine altogether. I'll be honest with you, a few
oh,
times in life, and and for a whole lot of different reasons. And obviously I didn't, and I'm here. But I do think you need to constantly reevaluate your situation. And nothing's compulsory either in life. And I think one thing we do is can make decisions, and then we have an inability to reflect on that decision. You end up, 10 years down the track, and there's a lot of miserable people who've chosen careers when they're young and end up, in their 50s particularly, and they're not particularly happy because I meant what I said. You get old very quickly, and life is very, very short. But the reality is that you've got to enjoy the journey as well. So no, I certainly, I think you're always reevaluating life. If you're not, then you're crazy. You need to reevaluate everything all the time, really, because you can't be chronically dissatisfied. I think that's a bad mistake. But I think you need to be reevaluating things. Yeah, definitely.
it's very interesting that you said you did have those crisis moments throughout the journey, because I
Mm,
feel like that's fairly universal experience for medical students, unfortunately, where, oftentimes whether it's when they start going to clinical placements or even when it's when they graduate and they become interns, many have confessed to feeling like, maybe this isn't for me, maybe I've put in all this effort and, I've realized that I'm not interested in this at all. In those kinds of moments, when you face those kind of crisis points, what kind of thoughts kept you going, or what kind of thoughts did you think about to reevaluate, as you said, about whether this was the right path for you?
What I've done, which has been really good, is I've built a portfolio career. So I do, professional things with people of different backgrounds. So we own an asset management business. So we've got an investment fund, and I work with a dozen people who are in finance and industry, and I spend a lot of time dealing with financial advisors. So I really enjoy that. I've always done things with industry, so I spend a lot of time doing advisory board work. I've worked over the years for consulting firms as well. So I've done some work with the Boston Consulting Group, and I did a little bit of work with McKinsey's when I was in New York. And so I find that gives you a way out of, so you can deal with other people, you can do things that are meaningful. I've always had the vast majority of my friends are non-medical, so I spend time with my non-medical friends doing non-medical things. So I think you have to do that, otherwise you'll end up going a little. And a lot of the issues we have in medicine with, people being cranky at work, and people treating their juniors poorly and stuff, is because they're basically unhappy people, and they take it out on people that can't defend themselves. I think it's a bit like that concept of kicking the dog. If you have a bad day, come home and kick your dog. So I think if people were happier in medicine, I think you'll find that would create an environment that was happier for everybody else as well. So
That's a very
mm,
interesting perspective. I don't think I've
mm.
had that discussion before, and I think that's really valuable
Uh,
for,
I
yeah,
think it's reasonable. I think the reality is that you're responsible for your own happiness, I think, and you have to you have to, how you manage that is up to you. And certainly the medical environment is very challenging. And the higher up the totem pole you get, it gets slippery and greasy and more hazardous as well. And so you have to be mindful of that. And you need, resilience, and you need abilities to be able to have perspective. You also need, we all need mentors. I've got mentors still that I rely on very heavily. You need to triangulate your perspective, and you need to talk with believable people. So it's really important. Actually, you need to look after yourself. You need to maintain, there's a whole lot of stuff around self-care and all that sort of stuff that's really important, that becomes more important because life, as you get older, it gets more complicated. When you're at your stage, you've got, what are you doing on Friday night, and, who are you dating? And that's kind of as complex as it gets. But you get to, my stage in life, you've got, children and older parents, and you can have illnesses in families, and obviously you've got different career challenges and other things. So it's really important to lay those foundations for yourself going forward.
It's really interesting that you said that you had a mentor, and you still do up until this stage. And especially with, the kind of the nature of getting into surgery, especially cardiothoracic surgery, more and more we're seeing that people are finding mentors who kind of guide them through that process, both mentally, like in terms of, what they need to do to get ready, and also just in terms of fulfilling the requirements. So in terms of when you were applying to cardiothoracic surgery, or when you were pretty much trying to get in, did you have a mentor at that stage as well? And
Yeah.
what kinds of advice did they give you that potentially helped you get in and still helps you today?
I was lucky in that I kind of, it in many ways it seemed to come relatively easy. In some ways, looking back on it now, is kind of alarmingly easy. I just put my head down and worked hard. Surgery. Some people find surgery, really difficult, and they struggle. And there's no way of knowing that, but I've always found surgery to be. I've managed to gain the skills. To be honest with you, it's been a long learning curve, but the surgery I enjoyed, and I could see myself improving, and obviously the people around me. So from that point of view, I found the progression into the training program. And funnily enough, we were talking about previous person who actually interviewed me for the training program, and at the time I got on, there was a very low interest in cardiac surgery, and so getting onto the training program was alarmingly simple. So I kind of got onto general surgery, and then went and did a PhD, and I very easily got a College of Surgeons scholarship for that. It was all very easy, much easier than it is today. And I'm not saying normally it's the other way. Our generation goes, oh, you guys have no idea how easy you've got it. It's the opposite. I think your generation's got it much harder than we did with getting on. There's way more medical students, and there's not as many. I don't know, the surgical training programs increased at all in time, so it makes it more difficult. And the other thing too is it's because it has to be seen to be fair. When I did it, a few phone calls happened, and you had big assessment panels, and everyone kind of knew who was getting on because of the way it worked, and everyone would work with everyone. Which is not necessarily correct, but in some ways it's easy, and now it's incredibly didactic and very focused, and it's all point system and stuff. So the ability to discriminate is very difficult. So I had a mentor, but no one ever sat me down and told me the realities of cardiac surgery, which I thought was interesting. And looking back on it now, a lot of my bosses were pretty frustrated, and it was a very high competitive kind of environment. So in many ways, it was I wasn't mentored per se. I had champions that kind of got me through the process, but there was no the mentoring side of things in that early phase. What really wasn't there, because I was a young guy, I was mid-20s, and I knew better, and this is what I was going to do. And I was obviously, they thought I was a good trainee, and so they put me on, and that was it. So I didn't really give it too much thought, to be honest with you. I had a bunch of people try to talk me out of it, which I ignored, of course, because I was a mid-20s male and didn't want to listen. But in retrospect, that was, I made my own decisions, and that's the decisions I made, and it's worked out well, which is good. So.
Absolutely. It's really interesting that you talk about the kind of state of the admissions into the surgical colleges when you were kind of entering versus what it is today, and what medical students know to be the reality today. It sounds like two completely different worlds almost.
It's unrecognizable, to be honest with you. We had, for general surgery, we had like what they called schemes. Since we had a Western scheme, I think Royal Prince Alfred was linked with Westmead, and And then there was a northern scheme, and I'm guessing southern scheme. So there was multiple, and now there's just a scheme. I think I don't know whether it's I don't know what general surgery, whether it's New South Wales or Australia based, and cardiothoracic was Australia, New Zealand. But I remember to this day that they said, oh well, we had 7 places, but the quality of candidates was pretty poor, so we only put 5 on. And that
Wow.
today is, I mean, the quality of candidates now down to 20 with 5 training places. They're incredible. You give all of them a job. So it is a very different landscape, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't have, except it's an observation. The US is very different. They have a very different training process, and having worked there, I do think it's better the way they do things in the United States than it is here, in terms of the way that training's far more certain, and you come out of medical school into training, and the other thing too is the hospitals compete aggressively for the best candidates, so they view the candidate as an asset, whereas I think we have a little bit of the opposite view, where it's kind of, oh, you're lucky to be here.
Mhm.
And I think we need to change the way we think about our junior colleagues, and that's what they are in terms of how we look after people, and how we look after their careers as well, because the unaccredited registrar burden, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is huge. There's lots and lots of people who are surgical aspirants that will never, ever, ever get on a training program. And then they get to mid to late 30s, and what do you do next? So that's something that I have kind of, having just come back from the United States, I would like to be able to assist with, is how do we actually make a career out of someone that's never going to get through? So, yeah.
It's really interesting that you say that about the United States, because obviously the systems are so different. I imagine almost unrecognizable as well. And it's a great segue
Yeah,
into
no,
some of the questions I had. Yeah.
it is different, and it's different and the same. It's different and the same.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
I'm gonna get you to elaborate on that a little.
yeah.
In terms of, the differences between here and the US, not only including like the medical kind of school system and how, you have people come through and doctors kind of progress their careers, but also generally the healthcare systems and your experience with it on the other end, the patient populations that you saw, various clinical practices, or even just the attitudes of the colleagues that you worked with, just to kind of compare and contrast that with what you may have seen in Australia.
Okay, we'll start with the medical student
Yeah.
thing. So the medical student system is becoming more and more similar, because obviously US medicine's postgraduate. I mean, there is some undergraduate medicine available in Australia still, but that's becoming less the norm. So what happens in the States is you come out of medical school into your specialty, and they have a interview process, and they have a thing called a match. And so what happens is we did it a lot. So we'd interview 20 or 10 people, and all of us would interview them, and then we'd rank them, and then they'd rank us. So they were the students and the fellows, because we had a traditional, we'll talk about cardiothoracic. So there's an I6 program. So you come straight out of medical school into a 6-year cardiothoracic program, and off you go. And there's what they call the traditional program, which is 5 years of general surgery, and then you do 2 years of cardiothoracics. Or there's another one where they call it a 4-3 program. And I'm not sure how that actually works, but there is some people that do a 4-3. And in my experience, the 4-3 guys were rock stars. They were unbelievable. The guys that done a 4-3 program, and maybe it was their training program was really good, but they were really, really good. So you come out of, and so the CVs to get to an I6 program, there's around 32 I6 training programs in the country. So if you extrapolate that out, the United States, a population of about 350 million, we're a population of 25 million, give or take. So you're looking at 32. So you're looking at 2 or 3 centres taking 1 or 2 trainees. So it's a really, really competitive. And so the CVs of these people were just off the charts. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and really high quality candidates. And then you went to the traditional program where they'd done general surgery, very different group of people, often a little bit more practical. And so they would get onto that. But what it meant was you come out of university or out of medical school into a specialty program. So you knew that if you completed that specialty program, you'd be board eligible, because they do their exams after they finish their training. So you're board eligible. Then you can get a job. And there's such a shortage in America of surgeons, and particularly of cardiothoracic surgeons, that the job market is very fluid and very, very good for people graduating. So, which leads into something else I would suggest. If you are going to do cardiothoracic surgery in Australia, I would set yourself up so that you're very employable in the United States at the end of your Australian training, in case because the job market here is the opposite. There's very few jobs, very few movement, and there's only, maybe 1 or 2 jobs a year across the whole country. If you're lucky, it's very, very tight. So yeah, it's a very different process. Whereas the process in Australia is you finish medical school, and then you do internship and RMO1, resident year 1, and that's usually unaligned. And then you spend time jockeying around trying to get various jobs to satisfy the criteria for the different colleges. And then you're doing research and the different courses you're supposed to do with the college you have to pay for. And then you do, the basic sciences exam, whatever they call it these days. And then you throw your hat into the ring, and you've probably got a 10 or 15% chance of getting on at the first go. So it's a very different process that's in many ways is more fraught with chance than the United States system. The other thing with the United States is that the training program is covered by the ACGME, the American College of Graduate Medical Education, which is a completely separate entity to the College of Surgeons. There's a lot more oversight about human resources issues, working hours, the way trainees are treated, and the ACGME takes a very dim view to bad training posts, and they will cancel your training post in a heartbeat if there's any transgressions, because the institution having a training program is very prestigious for the training program. So to lose a training program is a disaster. So it's very different to here. Whereas the colleges we run, I've been involved with the board in the past life, but I'm not involved with the board now. But so we control, surgery self-regulates, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm. And then potentially talking more about your actual clinical experience there and how you managed working with the colleagues and potential differences in the attitudes that they had or different patient populations. How did you find that in the US?
The patient population, I was at Ohio State, which is a state hospital of around 2,000 beds in Columbus, Ohio, and the home of the Buckeyes, very famous college football team. We had an incredible experience in Columbus. Really nice people. We joined the fancy local country club, which is unreal for kids. They had lots of friends, and swimming and golf and all the different wonderful things. So we were embraced by the community. I couldn't have asked for better colleagues. I didn't think it was possible, having worked in a few places in Australia, where the difference in the United States with surgery is that you're all on the same team, whereas in Australia we have a very unusual model where in surgery you do part of your time I've got a full-time university job. My job here is very different. Part of your time in the public hospital, working with people, and then you're all in competition with each other for private patients. And so that generates a whole lot of undercurrents of problems in terms of people getting on, and cardiac surgeons famously do not get on in Australia. And I think I'm not even talking out of school. It's just the way it is. And in the States, it was the opposite. We all spent time with each other, lunches, dinners, our wives were friends, our kids all knew each other. We were in and out of each other's operating rooms, helping. We'd pass difficult patients. Let's say I had my area of interest, they'd give those patients to me, and they had their areas of interest. And then patients that were way outside all of our expertise, we'd do them together. The patients were very sick, a lot of obesity, a lot of untreated chronic disease, untreated diabetes, untreated renal failure. So very, very challenging. I really enjoyed. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed working in the United States. It was amazing. I don't think I had there was the usual, hospital bureaucracy issues, but they made you feel very welcome. They made you feel very valued. You were an asset because you generate, even though it was a state hospital, it's for profit. So the state owns the hospital, or in fact, the university owns the hospital, and the state owns the university, because they generated huge amounts of revenue. Over $5 billion in revenue with a profit of close to $400 million US. So they looked after. We were the assets with the surgeons, with the guys, and the girls operating and generating revenue. So a very, very different model. Whereas often in public health in Australia, you doing activity costs the hospital money. So they restrict your activity all the time. Whereas in the United States, everything was about volume and growth and new markets and all that sort of stuff. So completely opposite to here. Yeah.
It's really interesting that you talk about all those differences.
Mm.
How did you manage to get that job opportunity? Like, was it something that you were very keen to do to kind of try out the
No,
US job
like a
market?
lot of like a lot of things in life, I random things appear and I take it. I've always been very inquisitive, and I'm very happy to, as we're talking, I'm very happy to talk to people. I think you meet different people, and that enriches your life as well. And and you have experiences, both good, bad, indifferent. I left a job in Sydney where I was particularly unhappy for a really long time. There was a bunch of stuff going on that was truly against my uh, ethical principles. So I just left, had no plan. I walked out, and I did private practice. I worked for the Boston Consulting Group. I started a couple of startups, which was interesting, and I did some really random stuff like some consulting work for some finance companies and VCs and various other things. And I was operating. I've got a good friend of mine's the head of a big hospital in Singapore, and we'd become friends over the years at international meetings. So he invited me to come and operate in Singapore for a week. So I did some operating in Singapore, and I also had an advisory board with one of the companies I work for, and so I had a bit of time on my hands. So I had one of those moments of I just don't want to what I was doing. I was too young to kind of be do you know. So I thought I'll just make a couple of phone calls. So I made a couple of phone calls, and as it turned out, the professor of surgery at Ohio State I'd met many years before, and he knew that I was available. And I emailed a friend at the Cleveland Clinic who sent my CV to Columbus because they were hiring, because they'd had a bit of a clean out, had a few clinical problems, and they had to remove a couple of surgeons. So they were hiring. They wanted an A team, and I got a job in 24 hours. And
Wow.
it was the first job. First job I wasn't even, I was an email of what's out there, and then that happened. And I thought that'll do. So I said to my wife, boom, and off we went. We went 2 weeks later. We're at the football in Columbus. We went for dinner at the lots and lots of dinners. They recruit you, like you go for dinners, and they show you how good everything is. And then real estate agents, and my wife spent time with their wives about schools and all sorts of stuff. And it just seemed like a good thing to do. And my wife's a dual citizen, so she's got a US passport. So it meant that our kids are now US citizens as well. And I've got a green card. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So it was a really random thing to do. But as I said, I was just in a particular, like we were talking about before, with sometimes you've got this, you're just not happy, and you got to do something different. And that's really what it came down to. It was I just needed to do something different, and off I went. So there's no plan. I didn't have a USMLE. I still don't have a USMLE. I just got a thing called conceded eminence because I'm old and I've done a few things, and I was a professor in Australia. So I just walked into a full professor at Ohio State, which was alarmingly simple. And then and similarly, I spent some time in New York under the same circumstances, was recruited there. But then the job here in Melbourne came up, and it was only going to come up once, and obviously that would have gone to somebody else. So we talked about it and wanted to come back to Australia. So I took this job. So a lot of the times it's serendipity, and a lot of this is not planned. Yeah.
I feel like I've talked to a lot of different specialists from a fair few different specialties, and they all say they had just a moment of serendipity where, something happened and they just took up the opportunity. It's completely changed almost like the trajectory of their career and where they've ended up. It's really interesting.
Of trajectory of your life. I mean, it's not just your career.
Yeah,
I was settled in leafy North Shore and academic medicine and private practice in Sydney, and then suddenly you're not.
yeah,
And that has its own challenges, but as I said, I was in a situation that was intolerable for me, so I just left, which was frightening and liberating at the same time. So it's often good to do things that challenge you. So if you're not happy in a work situation, you need to go. Yeah.
absolutely. One thing that you mentioned as well when you were responding just then was something about how you have stuff going on outside of just your general job in terms of
Mm.
whether you're consulting on various boards, or I think you even mentioned you have a few startups, or you were consulting for a
Mm.
finance company. So is this an
Oh no,
opportunity? Yeah.
yeah, no, we started. I tried to get some more active work within the funds management space, and we couldn't, so we just started our own. So a group of us put that together. It's called Cordis Asset Management, as in Cordis being the heart, and we basically buy companies that make devices that or buy shares in companies that make devices that treat all the different things that we do in cardiovascular, diabetes, renal, So it's a demographic play on the aging population and the chronic disease state. But it's also a way to expand your horizons and the people that you know, and it gives you all these things you don't know about it, and suddenly you know all about it. And then we're now nearly 2 years into our journey, and we've got real money that we're managing, and thankfully I'm not managing now. We've got an investment committee and a portfolio management group that does all that. But even that's interesting in itself, because they're doctors, you get a little bit narrow and you think that the whole world is medicine. And that's what I found when I did my PhD. Was I was surrounded by non-medical scientists, and you realize that there's a whole world out there of really smart people, and that working environment was interesting as well. And that mostly it was just lovely, and then occasionally there was some crazy people as well. But a lot of ambition, one of the issues in science in Australia is you go from grant to grant to grant to grant, so it makes it really hard. And I was very grateful I had a medical degree. So mostly what I do it for is it's yes, there might be some potential financial benefit, but most of the reason I do this stuff is because I just think I'm naturally very inquisitive, and I like to know about different things. So yeah, so that's why
Absolutely.
I do it.
It's really interesting that you talked about not just limiting yourself to within medicine and kind of branching out and expanding your horizons. So along those lines, at the moment, obviously, I imagine you'd be quite busy. You have a lot going on. Do you still find time to pursue any hobbies or any new interests?
Um, I've got three. I've got three kids and a wife, who obviously that's the most important thing in life. I'll be honest with you, and I tell you that now, is your family is the most important thing. So I spend a lot of time with them. I've got friends even in Melbourne. I'm not from Melbourne, but funnily enough, when you start poking your nose out, you realise you've got lots and lots of people you've met over the years. And so I've actually got quite a good network now of non-medical friends, which is good. And I've got network of medical friends but aren't in cardiothoracic surgery. There are people I knew at college. As one guy I ran into randomly at a restaurant the other night that we used to row together at college, and he's a pediatrician, and his wife, we were all at college together. So I haven't seen them for 30 years. And so that was just a wonderful serendipitous moment. They happened to be sitting next door to us at dinner. So we do that. In terms of hobbies, I like reading a lot. I do a lot of, mostly with podcast read, like, audio book reading, because I don't have the time to sit down and read, in a chair. So I multitask. I read at least a book every 2 weeks. I plow through books. And I basically read non-fiction books because I don't have time to read fiction, and I'll read one fiction book a year on holidays. So I sort of limit myself to that. I've done the Institute of Directors course. I obviously got my research stuff that I do with different things. And I really like playing golf when I can, but I don't get out as often as I'd like to. And I like exercising as much as I can. I need to exercise more, but I get up pretty early and get out in the world. And I've picked up that habit in the United States, getting up before dawn and getting out and getting some fresh air and spending some time thinking. And otherwise, I just live like a normal person. And I got my friends, and my son started playing AFL, so he's got as much idea about AFL as I do. So we go and do that, and I really enjoyed that. My two little girls like their sports and swimming and various other things. So you just live your life, and life is a journey, and it's not all work and it's not all play, and you've got to get that balance. And sometimes that gets out of kilter sometimes, but yeah, no, I do what I need to do.
Absolutely. And I think it's so apt that you mentioned balance. Because with all of the stuff that you have going on and everything that you just mentioned, I imagine it must be quite difficult to kind of manage your time, so that you can kind of commit yourself 100% to every aspect of your life. So do you have any kind of tips, or even just you could tell us about your day to day, as what you get up to and how you manage that time so well, so that you're able to kind of spread yourself out throughout so many things yet still give 100%.
It's a very good question. I'm not naturally talented at time management. It's not my natural talent. I think that you have to be really careful about over promising and under delivering. I think you need to, particularly as you move up the food chain, and obviously this new job has all sorts of complexities and challenges, and we've taken a fairly small unit and put into an enormous building. I mean, this building is ridiculously large with enormous capacity, and also it's ruffled a few political feathers, and people get nervous about suddenly a big unit down the road. So you've got to manage all that very carefully. it's really important to be the concept of servant leadership. So I need to think of my team before me, and that's something I've worked for people. Unfortunately, in medicine, that's uncommon, but I've worked for a couple of people over the years that have really demonstrated. My boss in Columbus was fantastic at advocating and looking after his team, and I think that he was an extraordinarily generous person. So and I've also worked with people who are the opposite, where it's all about them. So the number one thing is to make sure that every time you do something, that it's for the greater good and not for you. In terms of time, the iPhone's amazing. I run my life on an iPhone. In terms of, you've got a portable diary, you've got email, you've got phone, you've got Zoom, whatever else you want. So I use my phone a lot. The other thing too is you try not to. I find if you get too busy, then everything fails. So you got to be really careful about how busy you get. And otherwise, I've always been pretty good at multitasking, so I can do different things at once. So I can operate, and then I'll be thinking about a paper, and I'll be thinking about this and thinking about that, and I'll jump out and jump on my iPhone and fire off 5 emails, and I've solved. Like operating, as I said, I find operating very relaxing, and I find it quite therapeutic. So I don't have to use a lot of cognitive bandwidth when I'm operating. I've kind of sorted out the operation, so I can actually inside my head process a whole lot of other stuff that I need to deal with. And by the time I've left the operation, I've sorted out the 5 different things that I brought into the operating theatre. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but sometimes you have to. The multitasking is not just doing things. Multitasking is also what's going on in your brain. And obviously I've got all these different things that I'm doing with the asset management business, with the research, with, running the new department and the way things are working. And then obviously managing, where I have to be this afternoon and who I've got to meet with and all that sort of stuff. So it's really important that you have. The other thing is you need help. I've got a fantastic executive assistant, and I've also got an incredible wife that organises the rest of our life. So in some ways I'm surrounded by women that really look after me. That's quite good, because you do get a bit focused and go down rabbit holes and stuff, and that can be problematic both at work and at home. So you need help. To do my job, I need lots and lots and lots of people to help me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you talk about how, almost always sounds like you're solving problems in your head. I understand that
Yeah,
surgery is a very
always.
problem-solving based specialty. So is that something that you agree with, that, you must just be a very good problem solver and you're always just ticking off the to-do list or
Well, maybe I'm a
moving through it?
problem creator. I don't know. I mean, one of the things with surgery, as I said, I've been operating. I did my first operation 27 years ago. I mean, and admittedly that was probably draining an abscess or something simple, or cutting out a skin lesion. But I did my first, skin to skin open heart operation 20 years ago, 2003. And obviously there's that training period, and then there's that incredible 3-year period after you finish your training where you let loose, and sometimes you learn by your own mistakes, and that can be very challenging. That's a very emotionally challenging period that time. But you've got to get through that period. And then now I've seen most things, not once but many times. I've done operations many times now. So in that sense, it's a very calm, systematic approach to how you do stuff. And the more systematic you're operating, and the more systematic your approach to working patients up, planning the operation, but also being flexible. If you see something unusual, you need to be able to modify that. Or if there's a problem, you need to be able to deal with that. But most of the time, it's every patient's different, every operation is different, but it's fundamentally the same. You're basically fixing a structural cardiac problem, whether that be bypass surgery or valve surgery or aortic surgery or endocarditis, whatever it is you're operating on. And so if you've done that many times, if you're having to think really, really hard about everything that you do, I think there's a problem. I'll be honest with you. I think that the reality is that most of it is just, you've got a very strict routine. You make sure you do everything the same way, so everyone in the room knows what you're doing and you know what you're doing. The other thing, if you do everything the same way, you'll see a problem. Oh, that's not right. That's not right. And as I said, I've always enjoyed the operating room. I've never found it. I've never found surgery particularly, fearful. I've never really been. Fear hasn't been an emotion. You've had anxiety and you've had worry and those sort of things, but I enjoy operating a lot. And in many ways, no one can find you. You're busy. You can say, "I'm scrubbed, leave me alone." So in some ways, it buys you space and time, and it also as I said, it sounds crazy, but I will solve a lot of problems in my head and then come out and then the iPhone is, then you're on the phone and you deal with those 5 emails and you're done. So in that sense, you can multitask. Yeah, it's important to do that, I think, because a lot of surgeons, or some surgeons, are so hyper stressed that's all they can think about is the operation. But maybe I'm lucky, I don't know, but I just think the whole thing is very, you've got to concentrate and you've got to take everything very, very seriously. But I think having a relaxed view, you watch people that play sport and you see people that create time and space around themselves and they don't ever seem flustered and they're not yelling and screaming. And then you look at classic example, Nick Kyrgios, for example, who's an extraordinarily talented sportsman. And then he just loses the plot. And then you look at Roger Federer, who's the opposite. I mean, I don't think Nick Kyrgios's physical abilities and talent are probably the same as Roger Federer's. It's just that Roger Federer's got it sorted out between his ears. So I think that's the kind of thing that you need to be able to think about, is this surgery is a physical activity that requires a lot of concentration and planning and ability to adapt. And I was watching, Tiger Woods was giving something about the other day about what makes a good golfer, a great golfer, and then a truly great golfer. He said it's all between the ears. It's all about planning and it's all about decision making. It's also about managing your emotions and maintaining your cool, genuinely maintaining your cool in difficult situations. And I think that's where you get the best out of your operations. The other thing too is you'll have a much better day. So I would say if you're going into an operating room and you're finding it really stressful and it's all just fearful and horrible, and that's persistent, I'd probably sit back and have a really long, hard think about, do you really want to do this every day? Because it's just not for everyone. It really isn't. Just because you want to be a surgeon doesn't necessarily mean you should be. And I think there's maybe other avenues to go down, and that's where mentors are helpful. So.
Absolutely. I feel like that's a really nice way that we're nearly at the end of the episode. The time has flown by and we do nearly have to let you go. So towards the end of the episode, one of the last questions I really just want to ask you is, we obviously have a lot of listeners who are pretty keen to have heard your input, and I think you're one of the first cardiothoracic surgeons we've had on the show. So do you have any parting words for all of the prospective surgeons or cardiothoracic surgeons who are listening to this podcast right now? Any words that you'd like them to hear, take in, and absorb moving forwards?
I think we'll step back from code. I think there's 3 aspects to how you need to think about what you do with the coronary. I've been telling medical students and junior doctors this for years. So there's 3 things, and there's no order. You have to rank them yourself. So number 1 is interest. Number 2 is how much money you think you want to earn or need to earn, and the other one is lifestyle. And lifestyles, what time you get home for dinner, whether you have weekends off, whether you're up in the middle of the night, etc. So it's really important to rank. If you absolutely have to be a pediatric neurosurgeon at the Mayo Clinic, and that's all that's going, then that's to all other things, that's what you're going to do. But otherwise, you need to work out what those 3 things are, importantly. And the other thing you need to do is you need to write a list of the things that you don't want to do. And then you narrow it down to the list of things that you might want to do. And then you need to go and seek genuine information around what that career looks like, around those 3 things I've just said. How much money you think you need, how much interest you want. And because certainly in surgery, different surgical specialties earn, there's a vast range of income. There's a vast range of lifestyle. I mean, general surgeons are up in the middle of the night, doing laparotomies, and we're not that often, actually. We're not in the hospital that often. When we are in the hospital at night, we're there a lot of the night. So they're the 3 things. And the other thing too is I think you need to think, if you want to do cardiothoracic surgery, I really, really think in the current Australian environment is do your USMLEs, get all 3 steps, and set yourself up so that if the job market remains tight in Australia, that you have options. The United States will be 2,000 cardiac surgeons short in 2030. There's enormous opportunities in the United States to practice cardiac surgery, and I had a blast. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So that would be my final words. And if anyone wants to reach out and talk to me personally, I'll be very happy. Just send me an email at Monash Health, and we can catch up on that too. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today. I feel like even just me sitting here listening, I feel like I've learnt a lot and gained a lot of perspective, and I'm sure our listeners would feel the same. So yeah,
No, it's a pleasure. And congratulations on this. I think you're doing a good service.
Thank you.
It
Yeah,
takes a lot of work, a lot of
we're
effort.
trying
So
to
no,
simplify the ever complicated nature of getting into surgery, and we're just trying to make that a little bit simpler for everyone out there.
I think it's like having Vaseline wiped across a window. It's very complicated, and
Yeah.
it's very I have trouble comprehending it, and I think it's very challenging for you guys. But I do think there is ways you can do it. And as I said, the number one thing in life is to make sure you've got options. Don't paint yourself into a corner, so that if you have life events or things happen or whatever that you can't. And that's the thing I'm now happy with. I've got all these different things that I do, and I've got a job that I truly enjoy, and I've landed on my feet in a good health system. It's been fun. So yeah,
Awesome.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much, Professor Valley, for coming on today. Hope that we can chat maybe in the future, moving forwards.
Anytime.
But
I'd love to
yeah,
come back and have a chat. So yeah, no worries at all.
awesome.
Take care,
Thank you
Dave.
very
Nice to
much.
meet you.